Give Isaiah's me impression like a 6 out of 10. But here's my fun fact of the day, Anthony.
What's that?
I'm friends with the head meteorologist at Cape Canaveral who makes the go decisions versus not over the rocket launches.
Small world, and I'm sure that's a very stressful and important role to be in.
Brian, if you're watching, make the right call, buddy.
No pressure here. No pressure.
No pressure at all. Awesome stuff there. Well, hopefully we get to see that launch. I know that I love what goes on at NASA. It would be a dream to work for them as well. Right now, we're going to welcome our last live guest of the morning. We've got Michael Farlekas with us today, who is CEO over at E2 Open. Michael, thanks for being here. And we're continuing on this hot topic today, all about labor and the impacts of impending strikes, pending strikes, and current strikes.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really great to be on your show.
Definitely, Michael. And jumping into this topic, what are going to be some of the big takeaways as we look into the employment market and some of the shifts happening now?
Yeah, listen, you see the job market still being fairly tight, even though you have an impending recession, which is a bit unusual. I mean, you don't really, in my lifetime, you haven't had this kind of environment. And I think that's going to continue at least for the foreseeable future. So I think everybody's going to have to really focus in on how do they treat their employees overall, not just in terms of wage compensation, but also in terms of their work environment, flexibility. And the ones that have engagement and a great culture are going to get the best workers. And I think it's going to be a struggle for the next 6 to 9 months.
The pandemic really highlighted the companies who support people and their existence as people first, who just happen to work for a company, right? Instead of company workers who live their lives for this company and then they lose off being a person. And I think that it's really been kind of the winners versus the losers and what type of work that you're doing, how you're treating your people, and how they're showing up for you now in a very demanding and very tight post-pandemic world. And we know the companies and even parts of industry who haven't historically supported their employees very well are now kind of seeing the consequences, having to fight with people looking at striking, having to fight with people looking for labor contracts. Here in the United States, all eyes, of course, are on the railroads right now. And I want to kind of get your thoughts on that. We saw 3 unions sign a tentative agreement so far this week. Still have 11, I believe, left to do that. The strike deadline is September 16th. What do you think is going to go on there?
I spent the first part of my career actually working for a railroad, so I know how important the work labor is, and being able to operate very sophisticated heavy machinery across very specific train lines is a local skill. And I think they will work it out. We had the issue in Los Angeles with the ports that was worked out. I think it's in everybody's best interest to do that, and I would expect and suspect that will happen in due course, and both sides will come to a reasonable agreement. So I would not expect there to be a large strike kind of going forward. It hasn't been one for a while, and I don't think there's going to be one now, especially since that would have another effect on the overall supply chain. So I don't think anybody has that desire to have that occur.
And Michael, when we look at overall labor conditions, do you see this as a potential window of, or I guess a timing frame? Because the pendulum usually swings back and forth in terms of power of the employers to power in the employees' hands. Do you see this as now that the pendulum has kind of swung the other way, and now this is the time to really kind of act and really push for changes to be made before it starts swinging the other direction? Or do you see this as something that's just going to really be long-standing time, that this is just going to be the new normal within employment factors?
I think people's relationship with their employer is changing. It's changed before our very eyes. And part of it is that there are so many different kinds of work that people can do. So the idea of a fully employed person that works in a long career doing one thing all the time is a great option. But there are lots of people that work for in different types of work for several companies at once, and the pandemic has made that easier because obviously the communication and collaboration is easier. I think companies are going to really have to come to terms with identifying their stakeholders. Their stakeholders are, first and foremost, their customers. Next is their people, and then their communities, and then the shareholders. And my philosophy has been, if companies that are successful will consider all of them and not take care of any one to the detriment of the other. And I think companies have to really start thinking about how to create an engagement with their employee base that's more than just work and dollars. If you make it about work and dollars, then those things are easily transferable now. And I think what we try to do, and companies, sales owners try to do, is really think about how they can engage their customers and their communities to drive a deeper relationship with them. If you make it about the money, then it's easily transferable. And if you make it about kind of the mission of what the company's trying to accomplish and how we take care of each other, I think you have a better chance of retaining the best employees. Like a company like ours, 60% of our costs are people. And our people could choose to work wherever they want to work. They're highly trained, highly talented, and we have lower than average retention, mostly because we focus on how we treat each other and how we take care of our customers and how we take care of each other. I think the best companies in the world will increasingly do that.
Absolutely. And when you talk about that and kind of how people work together, a lot of it is culture to culture difference when you look at it from a global scale, right? The way that work culture is ingrained in the United States is totally different than the way that work culture is ingrained in the UK, across in Europe, and other places as well. Do you see kind of the differences in work culture really creating a difference in how labor negotiations go on when you're looking at an international scale? Or do labor negotiations look very similar no matter where they're happening?
Well, it definitely differs by geography, and different countries have different work rules that you have to be mindful of. But more than that, it's more the ethos of kind of how different cultures operate. We have lots of folks in Europe that take their time off very seriously and have extended PTO, and that's something that they're used to as their culture. You have to accept. In the United States, that's not as much. It's changing a little bit now. And, I think you have to take into account your labor force and their needs globally. And one of the things that, we have a large, diverse workforce around the world. And one of the things we really try hard to do is even little things like, we're a US-based company, but try not to have all the meetings on US-based times. Like simple things like that can really go a long way to make sure you have a, global culture, so that you're not really just working the time zones as the headquarters. So we take active steps to try to make sure we do those types of things and be very mindful of the local culture and have our leaders in different parts of the world that can tailor our culture, our messaging, and our benefits, frankly, to the different places where we operate. We have to treat people like with the respect they deserve, regardless of where they are.
I think that we have a lot of the younger generation, the generation just entering the workforce, to thank for this kind of movement into the different expectations when it comes to working now, right? And a lot of us here on that younger side are pretty vocal about what we want. Like I'm a huge advocate of talking about use all your PTO. I'm a huge advocate about salary transparency and benefits transparency and stuff like that. But here, as us being the ones just entering the workforce, we're often bottom tier. We're on the low parts of the food chain right now. We're on the bottom parts of the supply chain. We can be loud, but we can't really institute change. That comes from higher ups. Do you have any advice for these younger folks who are entering the industry, wanting to make change, wanting to be vocal about how they're treated, to really get the people in the positions of power to listen and to take action?
Yeah, I mean, well, first you have to make sure you work with companies and people that demonstrate they will listen. I mean, that's the first thing. If they're not willing to do that, then you have to make the decision you're going to make. And we're fortunate to be in the knowledge worker category. We have, we're a software company platform. We have about 4,000 employees. I've long thought about this PTO problem a little bit differently, which is, everybody knows if you're engaged at work and you're, in a knowledge worker area, meaning you're not having to work at a store or with customers or at an assembly line where you have to be physically there. I always thought it strange that you give people time off, but they tend to work a lot for the time off and then work a lot when they get back because they have essentially a job to do that spans time, So, we went to, unlimited PTO for our people, and we just asked people to, be mindful of not taking advantage of that or abusing that, and also making sure they have their coworkers cover for them. And that's worked out really, really well for us. But I think in terms of younger people joining the workforce, I think they have a choice in where they want to work, and they should exercise that choice, and they should listen loudly to what the leadership talks about. Generally what the leadership talks about is what they care about and think about. And the more they talk about things like work-life balance and making sure that you don't just say work-life balance, but you put actions in place to protect everybody from themselves. And everybody does this, and I do it myself. You just work too many hours. You have to identify your own boundaries and execute again. But if the executive team isn't at least mindful that people, especially in a remote environment, tend to work too many hours, and really put in place the safety and comfort to say, I have to, I can't do that right now, I have to do it later on and meter the workout. I think that's the most important thing. What executives talk about is what they think about. And I would tell any person coming into the workforce, listen to what they say. They probably are thinking about those things. They're thinking about things you care about, and they probably are thinking about the things you care about.
Awesome, Michael. Thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a great conversation. If people want to reach out real quick, how can they get in touch with you or E2 Open?
Hey, call my cell phone, 908-414-0405. I'm always available. I always answer it.
Awesome, Michael. Well, thank you for joining us. Have a great long weekend. We'll talk to you again soon. Right now, we're going to take one last quick break, and then we will be right back to wrap up our show.